Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Joffy Noodle Legs here today with another sort of top 10. But it's a top 10 but not in any specific order. Come on then mate, he wants to come and say hello. Here he is. Here he is everyone. Hello everybody. Little Sullivan wants to come and say hello, don't you mate? Yep, so this is a top 10 in a way, but they're not in like what's the best to worst, sort of like 1 to 10. These are 10 movies that made me a horror fanatic or addict, whatever you want to say. I mean, this is not saying these are the best horror films out there. Some of them are, because a couple of my, well, 3 or 4 of my favourites are in here. But it's just the ones that when I was young, in the sort of 80s, these were the ones that I used to watch and then 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 watch. I just watched them over and over and I just got absolutely addicted to them. It was my go-to sort of thing to chill out when I finished school, college or work, whatever I was doing, go to watch me horror movies. These were the ones I went to. Just because, I mean, you couldn't afford to buy loads and loads of movies back then. You know, you just brought, like, most of the ones I bought back in the day were ex-rental. I would go to Video Choice, which was in Stevenage Town Centre, and I would go in and browse the new releases, and I'd also look at the ex-rentals, and the ex-rentals were always the better deals because sometimes they weren't as cheaper as the new releases. Sometimes they were the same price, but they were more up-to-date sort of movies that had just come out. Because back in the day, movies, when they left the cinema, they came out to rent first, not to buy. They went through on sell-through after about 6 months to a year of being on rental. So it used to, because it's the way the market worked, and it was a way to make money. Because otherwise, if they all come out at the same time, on rental and to buy, people are just going to buy it and not rent. So the rental business was slop. So they used to come out on rental first. But after about a month or 2 months, they used to sell them as sort of like ex-rental copies, pre-owned or previewed. Video Choice did it, and then Blockbusters did it too. And then we got a Blockbusters in Stevenage. And so I used to go down there too and sort of buy stuff from there. But most of the time it was a store and a company called Video Choice. So I used to buy lots of movies from there. So that was my thing. And there was loads of amazing films, okay? And a lot of amazing films that I love are not in here. Just because I couldn't put them in here, or these were 10 standouts to me, and they're obvious, pretty much. But there were ones that I've excluded. Dawn of the Dead. What are you doing, puppy? Oh, he's eating his treats. A film called Santa Segrea. I used to watch a lot. A film called Vamp. Demons 1 and 2. I used to watch them all the time. But I can only fit 10 in 10. So they were absolutely, they were oh, and this one, which I've got here is like of an honourable mention. Pet Sematary. This is the original one with starring Fred Gwynn in it from the Munsters. Yeah, I used to watch these loads and loads because they were really eerie and really creepy sort of films and really cool. And Demons and Dawn of the Dead were just so gory. They were like, you know, they were like the sort of Terrifier films of the day. You know, they were really sort of gory films. And they were amazing. And it was like Demons was my first introduction really to the Italian sort of horror films. Because before then, it was pretty much American sort of horror. Because British horror wasn't as gory. It was we had the 1970s Hammer films, which did have some gore, and they were the first sort of ones to really include blood in the movies. And I used to watch them with my dad or my sister or whatever at home. I used to be on telly quite a lot, Dracula and Frankenstein. Frankenstein created women, all this kind of thing used to be on telly. So they were my roots, but they weren't the ones that made me a sort of that absolute fanatic of films. Because I could have watched Demons and watched it, but it wouldn't have made me a fanatic about horror films. But these 10 I'm going to go through, not in any order, are 10 horror movies that made me a horror sort of fanatic. Start off with something really obvious. Halloween, of course. John Carpenter's Halloween. It's one of those films that was just so convincingly scary. There was no gore in the film. It didn't need it. The one thing it didn't need is gore. It just relied on total jump scares and atmospheric scares by like shadows and seeing like things in the distance, that kind of scare. And that sort of worked, and it worked really well for this film. And it's amazing, and it's a classic horror movie. So Halloween is one of the 10 that made me a horror addict. Another one, of course, I've just spoke about this one. There's been a few reviews on my channel over the past sort of weeks, and it's the Omen films. Again, the whole trilogy is a film of like that was so scary, and it was like, and it seemed so real. You know, none of this seemed fake. You know, demons and stuff, you could see that was all made up, but this seemed real. When I was young and impressionable, it seemed real, whereas The Exorcist didn't. It seemed silly. You know, although it was amazing film. I do slant The Exorcist, don't I, quite a bit on my channel. I don't know why, because I absolutely love The Exorcist. But I think because I like the Omen films more, because it felt like realistic, and all the deaths were like kind of really realistic deaths, weren't they? You know, the guy with his head cut off, the woman hanging herself. They weren't sort of like deaths that you could not think, oh yeah, right, that's real. You know, they were like all seemed real, and that's what made that terrifying. So the Omen trilogy is another set of films that made me a horror addict. Try and get something a little bit less obvious now. This is sort of like a horror comedy, if you like, but I got addicted to it. I just could not stop watching it. And I think it's because I loved the characters in the film. And it's Fright Night. This is such a good film. It was so cool at the time. I mean, I've never been a huge sort of vampire fan. And this was sort of like laughing a little bit at the vampire sort of genre, but still being quite serious at the same time. And I absolutely loved it. And it had that real 80s feel, you know, sort of like, you know what I mean by the 80s feel, you know, like Back to the Future with Michael J. Fox with his hair and his clothes. This had that same sort of feel in it. You know, people dressed like that. It's a fantastic soundtrack to the film. It's really well crafted and acted, and it was just so cool. And it was like almost like about me, because it was about a lad who loves horror movies and addicted to horror, watching this horror late night show, believes there's a vampire moved next door, and gets the guy from the horror show involved with it and stuff. And it's really, really cool. And I just couldn't stop watching it. And it's quite a multi-layered film. And what I mean by that is that you can keep going back into it and finding new things in it that you didn't see before. And it's sort of like really, really cool. Fright Night, absolutely one of the top 10 films that made me a horror fanatic. Absolutely great film. Back to obvious, and my favourite film of all time, of course, Alien. I had to include it in here. I've picked up the wrong film. Alien is definitely, I've picked up the latest one. What a wally. It's definitely in my top 10 favourite movies that made me a horror addict. You know how much I love Alien. It's the most, to me, it's the greatest and the best survival horror ever made. You know, it's a survival horror film. It's not a slasher. You could class it in with a monster flick, if you like. or a sci-fi horror, which it's got both in there. But I look at it as a survival horror, um, where it's all about trying to survive. You know, there's one creature in it, and you've got to survive it. And it was just like, wow. And it kept me gripped and terrified for the whole film. Absolutely love Alien. It's just the greatest horror experience to me. And I saw it. I didn't see it in the cinema, and I didn't see it on VHS. I saw it when it came on TV. It must have been 1980 or something like that, or 79. It might have come onto the TV, and I watched it, and I was terrified by it. Like I said, you couldn't buy every film back then because they were quite expensive, and money went on to other things when you're young. You know, going out with friends and stuff like that. And to me, it was most of it went on to my records and music. But yeah, when I did buy films, it was always horror. So I used to watch them on TV sometimes when I could. But these films helped me. Well, they didn't really help me. They probably cursed me into being an absolute addict and just buying loads of horror movies, along with this other one that I saw on the TV for the first time. And that's the thing. I watched it on TV, and I remember recording it off the telly. Um, and it was on, I believe it was ITV it was on, and so it had advert breaks. So sometimes in the film, when it gets to a certain bit, I think, oh, the adverts are going to come on. I still remember that. I still look for it when I watch it today, thinking, where's the adverts? And it's just like, I remember it because I watched it so many times that I knew exactly when the adverts were going to come. And it's like, I still look for that now. And when I'm watching a film, I'm just thinking, yep, advert break here. Like, isn't that mad? But that's something that's why this film's really important to me, because it sort of really holds back that sort of memory. When I used to watch that VHS tape, I worn it out, I think, and because I think eventually it started to sort of like, the picture used to have a few wobbles in it, like you did with VHS sometimes. And you're thinking, what's that? I don't know. But yeah, The Thing was one of those movies that just sort of like stuck with me throughout my life, and I still love it today. It's amazing. It's very, very close to Alien, really, up there from my favourite films. Kurt Russell, I think he was one of those actors that when you're around that, when I was around that sort of age, started getting horror, there was a certain few actors that I would look out for. If Kurt Russell was in it, I bought it. And I ended up buying films that weren't even horrors because it had Kurt Russell in it. Elvis the movie and things like this. And he's been in so many cool films, and I love the guy. And Donald Pleasance was the other one. I thought, well, if they're in it, I'm going to love it. So I ended up buying loads of sort of like films with Donald Pleasance in it. So, you know, everyone else was probably buying anything with Robert England or things like that. But I was going with anything with Donald Pleasance or Kurt Russell. But they were just fantastic. And and I quite like that because that's showed me to different movies. You know, I got into films like Escape from New York, which I love. It's an amazing film, but it took me years to figure out that was a John Carpenter film, because you know when you're young you don't really take much notice of stuff like that. And I thought, God, this music and stuff really sounds like the guy from Halloween and The Fog and Assault on Precinct, and all that. And I just think it sounds just like, and it was. I was like, oh God, you know, it's sort of stupid, isn't it? So, but yeah, that was definitely a movie that made me a horror addict, along with my favourite zombie movie, Day of the Dead. Of course, I've told you the story of this when I saw it at the cinema. It was the first time I really saw gore on the big screen. You know, I've seen it on TV and stuff like that, but this was the first time I actually saw it in massive big screen in detail, and it made me feel sick. So I went to the toilet, and I was on a date, you know, but the date turned out fine, by the way. You know, we were boyfriend and girlfriend for about a year, so that was cool. And yeah, and this film stood with me, and I still love it today. And when it came out on X Rental, I sort of, when this came out on rental, I used to go into Video Choice nearly every week just to check and speak to the staff. Said, "Yeah, any um, ex-rental copies of Day of the Dead yet?" No, no, maybe next week, maybe next week. Still popular at the moment, so maybe next week. And then when I went in there one week, I was looking through films, and they called me over and said, "I've got one for you," and they had the Day of the Dead for me, and I'm sure um, that's the same cover that it was on the VHS, and so I bought that ex rental. I still think it was about sort of, I think they sold to me for about £11.99, which back in the 80s was still a lot of money. You know, it's like that's about two albums and a 12-inch single price, you know, for one film. But I took that off their hands gladly, and that was one of the films that made me a horror addict, without a doubt. Day of the Dead. I love Dawn of the Dead, guys. I really do. It's a phenomenal, groundbreaking film, but I just love that more. It's just something about it that's unique. This is more of a slower burn to Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead's a lot, I think it's longer, but I think this is more of a sort of slow burn. It's more of a build-up and characters. And it's made some of the zombies almost human-like. And it was so sort of like, yeah, it was just different to any other zombie film, and I loved it. Really cool. Getting quite near the end now. So another one that I had to put in here, because it's another film that I used to watch constantly, and that's American Werewolf in London. I just absolutely, and this brought it home because it was based in England, in London. You had shots of London, and I knew London. You know what I mean? I was a young teenager. I knew London. I've been there. You know, I've been to concerts there. I've been there with my family and stuff. I've been there before, so I know London. So seeing shots of London in the film, it was like, and with English accents, and I think at the time I was quite a big fan of the Young Ones and stuff, and Rick Mayall starred in it, and the old wrestler Brian Glover was in there, which I remember because I was into wrestling. I still am, but he was in it, and I just think, wow, this is so cool. And then obviously that transformation, which is absolutely amazing. I love it so much, that my entire back, up across my shoulder blades, I've got a tattoo, a scene of an American Werewolf, which is just because I love it so much. I will do one day show you it. I'm just not going to take my shirt off now and show you a tattoo, but yeah, I love it that much. I actually inked it on my body, along with Alien and a few of these others. Absolutely fantastic. American Werewolf. Another one that's a lot of, okay, that's cool. Different, that's in there, is one that was still really, really cool. It's a 70s horror film made by Brian De Palma, and it's Carrie. It's just one of those films that I was absolutely addicted to. It was just terrifying when I first saw it. I just thought, wow, this is, because it starts off, the film sort of plays like doesn't play like a horror film really. It plays more like a sort of like high school sort of bullying sort of film, with sort of like a bit of sort of science fiction with the sort of special powers. But you get to the last 15-20 minutes and it turns into a horror movie, and it's just like, wow, that's just so cool and scary. And it's a terrifying film, a terrifying story, and I watched it over and over and over. You know, I used to quote all everywhere to my friends, you know, especially me female friends. I used to say, "Oh, I can see your dirty pillows," and all this sort of stuff. You know, you know, they're all going to laugh at you. You know, so I just used to watch that all the time. Absolutely fantastic. And another sort of, the last two are slashers. This one is not so obvious, and probably not on most people's list as being one of the films that made them a horror sort of fanatic. And this is Happy Birthday to Me. I just brought it. I bought it on a new. It was on, what was the company? I think it might have been Forefront Videos. I can't remember. But this came out. It came out at a reasonable price. I think it was about 8 or 8.99 when it came out on VHS, and I brought it because I loved that. I thought, wow, that's really cool. That looks like something I would see that Jason would do, and you know what I mean. So I bought it on that, and that was it. I just watched it and watched it and watched it. Absolutely loved the film. It's amazing, and I think when I watch films like Urban Legend, you know, from the 90s, and Scream, I think you've watched that. You know what I mean? Because it's that sort of same sort of suspense to it. A bit like films like The Initiation, which I've got a review coming up on that on my channel. It's the same sort of similar sort of film, but this was absolutely fantastic. Really cool film. Absolutely love Happy Birthday to Me. Brilliant film. So that is one of the films that made me a horror addict. So the last one, I'm cheating because there's about 10 or so of these films. It's the Friday the 13th. I watch these over and over and over and over, and I still do. I don't get fed up with them. I don't get bored with them. I know what's going to happen. I know the scripts. I know the cast. I know the Crispin Glover dance. You know what I mean? And I just love everything about this series. Just fantastic. Yes, there's been a couple in there that were a bit, you know, okay. Jason Goes to Hell. It's not probably one of the better ones, but you know, but they're just amazing. They're just one of those sort of popcorn horror movies that you can sit and watch and get to know the script, and I'm just become absolutely addicted to Jason Voorhees, as you can see, and I absolutely love the films because they were very similar to Michael Myers and Halloween. It's the same sort of premise, but this had the bite that didn't have. Halloween had the scares and the atmosphere, and this had that sort of. It was scary because where we lived in Stevenage, we used to have woods behind us, and I used to spend a lot of time in the woods playing as a kid, and it made me a little bit scared of the woods. I used to hear noises at night. You know, start to hear like there's probably animals and that, and used to hear owls and stuff at night, and it always reminded me of Friday the 13th. Nothing to do with it, but because sort of like this is in a sort of like wooded lakeside area, I suppose it sort of like made it was a bit close to home. This, I had the same feeling when in the 90s with the Blair Witch, because that the night after I saw it at the cinema. Because my room used to back onto the woods. I heard noises all out there, and it just terrified me for ages. That film, absolutely terrifying film, underrated film, The Blair Witch. But yeah, Friday the 13th are my go-to. Now they're my go-to sort of retro memory films. When I want to go back to the 80s when I first got into horror, and I want to have a really cool time, I go to these bad boys. You know, they're just fantastic. And that is my 10 horror movies that have made me a horror fanatic. So, well, actually, probably 20 if you look at that. It's Friday the 13th, Happy Birthday to Me, Carrie, American Werewolf in London, Day of the Dead, The Thing, I told you they're all obvious, Alien, Fright Night, Halloween, and the Yeoman films. What are your guys? What if you're a horror fanatic or addict? What were the films that made you addicted? Let me know down below. I know my good friend Russell is a really big sort of a Nightmare on Elm Street sort of fan, so I know those films really sort of got him into the horror sort of genre, and he likes some of the sort of Jeepers Creepers kind of films. But he's a little bit younger than me, so my teen years were these sort of things. But yeah, let me know down below what yours were. I hope you like this little video, guys. I've not done many top 10s for a while, just because I've sort of like, kind of like, not run out of ideas, but I'm not sure what to do with that. If you've got any ideas of what top 10s in the horror genre you'd like me to go through, let me know down below as well, and I'll have a look at it for you. But until my next video, check out some horror channels for me. Check out Horror Hands, The Horror Geek, and Man v Film. RS Designs, Pizzlewell, I Am the Ice Lord, Cat Watches Horror Movies, Grumpy Andrew's Haunted House, and check out Sarah of Horror. Until next time, look after yourselves, look after one another, and I really hope I'll see you all soon.